Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Ask the Experts, or Ask our very, very experienced fundraisers who between them all have thousands of years and hours experience in fundraising. And we have brought them together for the last 5 weeks to answer your questions that you've been sending in. And this week we thought we'd mix things up a little bit and bring them all to you live on the screen. We've got everyone here, and what an incredible bunch of people. So this week I'm going to pose both questions to every expert, and you will hear them live from their own mouth about their thoughts on the two questions for this week. So I am going to kick off with our Aussie counterpart, Sean Triner. Sean, what is the greatest fundraising lesson you've learned during COVID-19?
Thank you. I'm still English. I just live in Australia. Both. Anyway, hello. Thank you. So the biggest things I think that I've learned and have been very, very stark have been the difference in the way that charities and their fundraisers and their boards, the particular boards and CEOs and management, have responded. And there's become two clear camps, the warriors and the doers. And if you want to know which one is which, it's really easy to see. Those that have had a record February and March and April results were the doers. Jeff Brooks has just published an article looking at successes within just our members. We have 45 organizations that have had record amounts that they've raised, just stunning amounts of money, but also some amazing innovative donor love stuff. Like one of my Italian clients, the first thing they did was get on the phone and start organizing town hall style church services when the church closed down in Italy. They were ringing their donors just to check how they were, if they knew how to do online shopping and things like that right from the beginning. Some fantastic stuff, really mixing donor love, real genuine donor love that wasn't contrived as a donor care piece. It was done because they love their donors. And the best way to come across as authentic is, be authentic. But then there's the downside as well. We've seen a real dark side in charities with record amounts of crying from clients, with bullying from boards, CEOs, terrible behavior from people with a complete disrespect for fundraising decisions, people saying we're not going to fundraising these times, the last thing we want to be doing is bothering our donors, and that whole attitude of bothering our donors has been shocking. So that's been really upsetting. So it's been like an emotional roller coaster for all of us working with charities, just like it is with the charities themselves. With some organizations like World Vision in New Zealand just doing some amazing stuff, really getting press ads out again, like the olden days. Stephen, you'd like that? Some amazing press ads, radio ads, and just old-fashioned stuff, not just relying on digital with direct mail ground to a halt in New Zealand. Some amazing stuff. And then that sad side on the other side. So I've just learned that governance and good management and earning of respect is just so important for our sector. We've really got to work on that.
Brilliant. So with that in mind, what are you most excited about in fundraising beyond COVID? What shifts do you see happening, and how will that shape the future?
Oh, sorry, I thought we were all going to do the first one.
Yeah, it's all right, it's all good. No, we can do that.
Well, no, I mean, I'm very excited because of that worrying and because of that warriors and doers. I mean, it's been a bit Darwinian because a lot of the warriors won't exist anymore. And these conservative boards and the ones that have decided not to spend any reserves but cut fundraising and staffing, like what the heck are reserves for if it's not for now? It really makes me upset. But we've seen some amazing stuff. So again, some as well as really good practice. People are genuinely investing in donor love, genuinely invested in fundraising, really working hard at how to do best practice. Membership of Messianic went up 50% as people were just craving knowledge and deciding, this is the time that I want to learn. And I think that will really come through. And sure, in stuff like digital going from 8% of donations in the US to maybe 15 or even 16% in 1 year after going up like 0.1 or 0.2% a year. I think there's some amazing kind of practical stuff like that, but there'll be this shift, I hope, towards the professionalization of the sector, we don't want to get back to normal. We want to get back to a really thorough professional side of fundraising. And I think that bodes well for us all. And of course, acquisitions or mergers and acquisitions where charities are saving each other. Even suppliers have been saving each other with agencies borrowing staff from other agencies to keep them in a job with a promise to give them back and doing so. So it's a beautiful, wonderful touch in time.
Brilliant.
I think
Thanks,
it will
Sean.
really go across into the future.
Brilliant. So let's go over to the other side of the world and let's hear from one of our female fundraisers, Rachel Muir in Texas. Hi, Rachel.
Awesome. Hello.
Hi, Rachel.
Hello there.
How's life in Texas?
It's good. It's
Fabulous. Good. Okay, Rachel, what is the greatest fundraising lesson you've learned over there during COVID-19?
Yeah. So, former President Obama's chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, said, "You never let a serious crisis go to waste." And what I mean by that is it's an opportunity to do things that you didn't think that you could do before. And the thing that has humbled me the most and inspired me the most is seeing charities getting out there and being nimble and being fearless and being brave with their fundraising and being brave and willing to try new things and experiment with new things. Some positive things I've seen, organizations, getting a chance to do some of the things that they wanted to do and didn't have a chance to do and now are doing. Organizations who were willing to be brave, willing to be vulnerable, willing to allow themselves to be vulnerable, which is an act of bravery in itself, whether that vulnerability is around talking about how deep your needs are or connecting with people on a very deep and personal, emotional level. And also organizations that were willing to, if they had an opportunity, to be playful and make fun of themselves. So I'm going to brag on one organization that I donate to, the Humane Society of Northeast Georgia. I don't even live in Georgia. I donate to this organization. And some of the really amazing things that I saw them do during this crisis that exemplifies all of that is, of course, getting out there right away, being a doer, not a worrier. They've actually raised double where they were this same time last year. But in addition to getting out there and being brave and being fearless and asking frequently and calling their donors and checking on their donors, they also did, they launched this Feel Good Friday. And it was something that they had wanted to do before, never had the chance to do it, where they just, and I'm the town crier for donor love, and I was before and I still am, but they did this Feel Good Friday where they sent out an email every Friday and they just told a great story of someone who adopted a pet whose life was made better. And their donors just loved it. And they were like, we want to put something happy in your inbox. They had a video of a dog who was watching his baby mama and their litter of puppies. He's sitting on a couch and he's watching a video of his baby mama and their puppies, and he won't stop watching this video. He's like glued to the screen. Those are kind of the ideas of things that they did. They also did this hilarious, they launched this peer-to-peer virtual fundraising event, and they launched it with a a spin-off of this TV show. You probably have heard of it or seen it, Tiger King. And they literally they had their a male who works there dress up like Carol Baskin with a wig, got dressed up in the executive director's leopard print shirt, and did this hilarious call for people to join them. So they were willing, they had a window in there to be playful, and they grabbed it, and they they were just, I think it's all those things, being brave, being willing to put yourself out there. I've seen so many great organizations that have done that and are being rewarded for it with deepening those relationships. And I think that's really, it's those that are nimble and willing to get out there that will, are doing really well right now.
Brilliant. Across the world to Ireland and catch up with the wonderful Simon Scriber. Hi, Simon. How are you?
Hi, Michelle. Greetings from sunny Ireland. Yeah,
it looks like you're in the tropics there.
It's beautiful. Yeah, I wish I could go outside, but this is just the window.
So, Simon, what is the greatest fundraising lessons you have learned during COVID?
I think obviously it's been amazing to see all the new things people have done and how they've adapted and just the changes and innovation of the group. Sean talks about the people who've actually taken this as part of their strategy, who've adapted to it. But I think one of the things that's been really interesting for me is the reminder that actually, even in this really unprecedented, strange time, that the same principles apply. that actually not a whole lot has changed, and the people who you know, who think this is a big change to fundraising, you know, maybe in for a bit of a surprise, because you know, a lot of the same principles apply, that the more you ask and the better you ask, the more money you get. And that applies during a global pandemic and not during a global pandemic. And the stories of donor love and you know, just looking out for our donors and checking in with them and sharing stories and not just asking them for money, that works, you know. And you know, a lot of the people on this call, or everyone on this call, who I take advice from and I learn from, they've been talking about that for years. You know, Ken Burnett wrote about this decades ago, and everything in Ken Burnett's book and everything all these people have been saying applies right now. And it's interesting because, you know, there's like a mental barrier for us. I do webinars for this American company, and they asked me to re-record or redo my webinar and thank you letters, because they said it needed to be updated for how you thank people during COVID-19. And I said no, and they got kind of pissed off, because I was like, nothing's changed in how you thank. You know, everything we teach about how to thank people, it applies during COVID-19. There isn't a secret COVID-19 thank you. And so I think that's the case. And I think, you know, we've talked about it a lot in terms of how technology has changed fundraising and everything. That, you know, we think digital and all these innovations coming in change fundraising, but they don't. They're just a slightly different medium and a slightly different process. But if you know the principles of fundraising, if you know the basics and what works, you apply that to everything. And then you become a much better fundraiser, because as new technology comes out, as new, you know, as people try and peddle new products and things like that, you can react and you can actually say, well, does this stand against everything we've learned about fundraising, or can this work with what we know works in fundraising? So I think that's been the biggest lesson for me, or the biggest kind of reminder for me, is that even when everything is upside down and everything is so crazy, that if you apply the basics, you succeed. And that's exactly what people are doing. Those who are going out and asking are succeeding, and those who are using principles of donor love and good donor care are succeeding. And the people who are following the rules that didn't work a year ago, they're not working now either. And so that's been really interesting to see during all of this.
Thanks, Simon. Let's fly over to Canada and hear from one of our other female fundraisers, Sam. How are you, Sam?
Oh, I'm so excited to be here with all of you. Yeah, I've got a kind of a unique perspective, I think, Michelle, in terms of what I'm doing right now. When everything sort of hit in Canada here, it was sort of the March 12th and 13th when everything sort of went a bit crazy. And I wear two hats. As you know, I'm a professional fundraiser, but also a radio host. And this is my 52nd day on air today straight. And what's good about that is that I'm sharing the good news. The good news about fundraising, and there's lots of great stories. So if I was going to say that there's a lesson learned, is that even in our darkest days, those people that are willing to tell good stories will get time to do that. So, you know, with kind of both hats on as a fundraiser, I was thinking, like, I would reach out to somebody and say, oh, do you want to come on the air? And they're like, no. And they'd be all nervous. And I'd make another call to another CEO, and they would be like, yeah, what time do you want me? And here's my key messages, and so anxious to tell that. So very much from what we've been hearing from all of our colleagues today is the same thing, is if you were willing to be out there, there was a spot for you in terms of with your donors, or whether it be with media. But people were so craving, because so many people, myself included, you feel helpless. And I think as fundraisers, we gave that opportunity to have hope. And whether it came in in a package of a $25 donation or a matching gift or Giving Tuesday or whatever form that took, we were actually the link to make people feel connected again. And those people that took advantage of it really will come out on top. And those people that worry, and really, I had a couple of clients. One client I lost over it, to be honest. They said, no, we can't. Our donors are already going to be hurting, and we just could decide to part ways. And I was okay with that, because I knew at the end of the day that was going to be a better decision for me. And they just decided that they wanted to take a quiet approach. And lo and behold, 2 weeks later, they lost their CEO. So I think, he was let go, but I think those are those opportunities when you have a board that's very nervous. It trickles down. So I echo a lot of what was said. I think there was a lot of good news, and that's one of the biggest lessons that I've had.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sam. That's brilliant. So let's come all the way back to New Zealand, and let's hear from Clive Pedley. Clive, what is the greatest fundraising lesson you've learned right here in New Zealand during COVID-19?
Yes, I'm going to be echoing, I think we're all going to start echoing similar messages. So I just want to underscore what Sean said initially about leadership. So again, I've seen firsthand, we always knew that boards and CEOs and executives have a dramatic effect on fundraising when they apply themselves in a positive way. And we're seeing the converse also being true, that when they apply themselves in a negative way, they also have a huge impact on fundraising. So I have observed that and just want to agree on that point. Thinking about this question earlier, I was reflecting on when I was on the CFRE board and involved in the exam committee there. One of the key roles in that exam committee and putting questions together was considering the universal or the global truths of fundraising around best practice, and what was a question that had an answer that was true anywhere in the world. And that was really always a good lens, because it really helped you focus on the global truths of fundraising. And reflecting, I agree with what Simon said, that the fundamental global truths of fundraising are true in a pandemic as they are in a non-pandemic. So if you think about an organisation can put together a compelling, urgent, rational, emotive case, and can ask in a really donor-centric, effective way, and invite them to partner in a way that meets needs rather than giving to an organisation that has needs, that will result in successful fundraising. So nothing new under the sun. And again, just want to agree with what Simon said, that there are core global truths of fundraising that are essential to be applied. Yes, the environment might be tweaked a little bit, but the way that donors want to respond to causes that they care about, that they believe in, hasn't changed a whole lot. I think that there's an evolution part, which I'll answer in the next question, associated with that, but that's been my biggest lesson. The global truths are still true. Brilliant.
And let's fly over to the UK and talk to Ken Burnett, who was out here in March, sharing his storytelling lessons from his recent book. So Ken, what is the greatest fundraising lesson you have learned during COVID-19?
Well, I think as you move progressively along, we're all going to be agreeing with what's been said before. But so I certainly do. I think the best thing for me is just how great donors are, particularly at a time of crisis. And I think they never fail to come up and deliver the goods and support the organizations they believe in. So I think the big lesson always for me is that building a robust file of individual donors is always the best asset that a charity can have. So we've seen so many different types of fundraising that have suffered during this crisis, but on the other hand, those who are raising money from individual donors, who are contacting their individual donors, telephoning their individual donors, have really done so well about it. Now, I mean, I think we always knew that this was one of the best things, that building an individual donor file is one of the best things that a charity can do. But it is, as I think Sean and Simon have said, it is very clear that a lot of chief executives and senior management teams, and particularly trustee boards at charities, really don't get this. And so I saw Jeff Brooks' article today, which is absolutely fabulous, because it's talking about great successes. And at Sophie, we're putting together for Thursday's update a 14-page article which features 22 different organizations who've all done fabulously well during this time. And I think one of the, well, probably the greatest lesson therefore really is that we need to get together and find a way to make sure that those trustee boards and senior management teams who don't get this, that they really see what has happened in this, possibly one of the worst crises to hit our communities in living memory, and yet it proves that the best thing a charity can have is its individual donors.
Well, let's hope that this this video that we're creating right now makes its way to those right people, and I think that's a good starting point. Let's come back to New Zealand and hear from our very own Fee McPhee. Hi, Fee. How are you? And what is your greatest fundraising lesson you've learned right here in New Zealand during COVID?
Thanks, Michelle. I'm good, thank you. I joked about wanting to go last, but I think I lied. A reflection of what everyone else is saying. I wrote down culture and leadership. So having to work with so many organisations pretty rapidly as this kind of started up in New Zealand, and I think we had some sort of critical impacts, losing direct mail fairly early on. The big thing for me was where the culture and the leadership supported fundraising. People were able to be brave, like Rachel said. People were able to be doers, not warriors, like Sean said. And the organisations that had cultures that supported fundraising showed respect for their fundraisers, showed respect for the fundraising strategy that they already had in place. So, you know, like Simon and Clive were saying, they could keep applying the basics, they could keep doing those global tactics that always worked. And the organisations that don't have cultures or leadership that support fundraising became the warriors, or the ones that have shut down, or the ones that have lost their fundraising teams. So that for me had this flow-on effect there, where decision-making, some were able to be decisive and actually make decisions, and I've still got some sitting there who haven't made decisions, and we're weeks and weeks and weeks into this, and they've disappeared into the background. So I think that idea too that Rachel mentioned there, or was it Sam, about people willing to tell their stories. And for me, the bravery and leadership, willing to stand up and put themselves out there and actually talk to the public, talk to their donors, and be transparent and honest. They might not know the answers, but they're willing to stand up and say, we're here, we're listening to you, this is what we're currently doing, I'm going to keep you updated. And Ken, I've got a couple of stories there for you for Sophie, I think, based on some who really did that incredibly well. And as you said, Sean, they've had huge months, huge periods of fundraising versus the ones who didn't. So culture and leadership for me, supporting fundraising.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, I'm just going to jump in here a little bit quickly before we finish with the other, ask Stephen and Abby. And it's interesting because I've had personal phone calls from fundraisers who, I think, you know, we've got such an amazing leader like Jacinda, who are really nervous about taking advantage, and they feel that, you know, we have to be gentle and considerate and empathetic, and, you know, have empathy like Jacinda does, and I think that, you know, they are confused as to, you know, going hard and keeping it going and what's appropriate. But it's nice to hear that.
As Ken said, donors are the heroes here, and the organisations that spoke to their donors and were able to take what they said back to their bosses, their boards, and say, donors are keen, they care, they want to hear from us, they're still supporting us, they're still with us, made such a huge difference. Yeah. And that leadership that retreated and didn't speak to donors, or were scared, or put their own personal experience or feelings on donors, are the ones, again, who become the panickers.
Yeah. Okay, let's go over to the UK and let's hear from Stephen George. Stephen, welcome. And what's the greatest fundraising lesson you've learned during COVID?
I think what's interesting is, you know, sort of tail end of this is you're listening to a lot of other people who are saying very similar things, and it's kind of interesting to try and unpack that a bit. That I think there are some learnings about some of the negative stuff. I think it's, you know, I think we shouldn't sugarcoat the reality that, for me, there's two things. It's certainly leadership. I've learned a lot more about leadership and how bad it is in lots of places. And I think that kind of level of exposure, how bad that leadership is worth highlighting and pointing out when we get the other side of this, because I think we've got to find a way to move that to one side, else we're never ever going to get through that and grow. So for me, it's leadership, and the second part of it was essence. So the reason I picked the word essence as a kind of lesson for me, the thing that I learned, was because you kind of get to a moment where everything is boiled down, and all of the monster that has become some of the charities and the organizations that we have, all of the peripheral pieces and all of these bits that for a long time for me have felt as if the fundraiser has been squashed, has been unable to have any breath or air or oxygen, is not understood, doesn't get allowed to cut through. Someone cuts it, slices it up, moves it on, and they lose their own confidence as well. And they can't actually, they get lost in technique. They think that they're having to learn things that actually really are quite simple. So the lesson is to watch two groups, the group that get that essence and pick the phone up when they can't do anything and have actually just, like talked to someone. And in fact, not even asked them for money. They've just rang up supporters. Many, don't forget, who are elderly are at home, and they're ringing them up and they're saying, how are you? We just want to see if you're okay. And then and you kind of get this rapport that builds that's just completely different from all of the barriers and stuff that we've had in front of us. And I think that's been amazing. The essence of it was kind of spirit of it, really. I was reminded about that spirit of it because it's actually, I think it's 3 years ago, Abby, that we were at, that was 3 years when I met you, when we were in New Zealand at FINZ, actually 3 years ago. And for me, I remember that moment. That was a moment when there were a lot of fundraisers who seemed to be able to get the essence of it. And I do remember, and for many of you, I remember that moment when you look around the world and you see good fundraisers stuck in bad organizations with bad leaders. And you see the moments where you get the good leaders and the good organizations, but with good fundraisers who are allowed to do the stuff that they're allowed to do. It's kind of joyful, really. And if ever there's a learning out of this thing, it's we've got to find a way for that good stuff to flourish, because it's getting lost. It's getting lost otherwise.
Brilliant. Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, and that's a nice feed into Abby. And so Abby is from Australia, and her kind of specialises in the corporate partnership. So it might be interesting to hear what do you think is the greatest fundraising lesson in the corporate space that you're seeing during this time?
Yeah, absolutely. And hello, everyone, and everyone listening. It's fab to be here with you all. I think the biggest fundraising lessons for me have been around not making assumptions. I've been seeing a lot of charities make these assumptions about, donors are struggling and brands are struggling and companies are struggling and employees are struggling and we just should not do anything. But of course, we've seen, toilet paper manufacturers and bike repair mechanic stores and all sorts of brands and businesses absolutely find they've been unexpectedly booming during these times. So I think the biggest lesson for me is helping fundraisers just kind of press the reset button and say, how about we don't make any assumptions? And how about we do go back to those basic applications of donor love? And that's something that a lot of corporate fundraisers don't necessarily do. We have our donors, but corporate partners are seen a little bit differently. Sometimes they can be seen as a private funding model. Sometimes they're sponsors, it's a very transactional relationship. Of course, sometimes we have beautiful, multi-layered, complex, transformational partnerships, which are best practice. But I'm seeing a lot of opportunities right now for fundraisers to go back to basics and, like we've been saying, pick up the phone. How are you? And what we're seeing is, I'm seeing certainly a lot of charities realizing that actually they are the thought leader in so many areas, and they do have things to offer corporate partners. They might have opportunities to guide employees through, you know, their mental health, to offer coaching, to offer online exercise classes. We're seeing all sorts of ways that charities are kind of digging deep to go, what could we give our corporate partners right now? Because there was a lot of assumptions that all of our sponsors and partners are going to leave. They're all going to pull their funding and they're going to leave. And actually what's been interesting is that, to their credit, a lot of partners have stayed. They've, you know, events have been postponed, events have been cancelled. I've seen a lot of innovation, which I'll probably talk about in the next, you know, in the next question. But I think there has been these two camps that everyone has kind of spoken about, the doers and the worriers. And what I'm worried about particularly is that, you know, a lot of charities have closed down, have shut their doors, have laid off staff, and there are ones that are really trying to stay relevant right now. But when this winter period passes and spring kind of comes through, I think all of those charities that kind of closed down or had to kind of contract services will want to start blooming in the spring once again. And it's going to be a very, very noisy, difficult period potentially for people to kind of work out what their point of difference is, because everybody's going to be, you know, trying to reinstate corporate partners and go out to new partners. So what I'm seeing is really successful is people who are continuing that donor love, reaching out to corporate partners. How are you going? Where are you at? What's happening for your brand? Are you laying off staff? Are people working from home? What are your greatest needs at the moment? What's happening for you? Very much those principles that we've all been speaking about.
Brilliant. Okay, so for the next part, as we've said to everyone, the next question is based around what are you most excited about in fundraising beyond where we're at? What are the biggest shifts taking place, and how does that shape the future? So I might kind of throw open here. Does anyone have a strong urge to jump in and start this one?
Well, of course, so I'm not last again.
Yeah, go. Come on, Fee. So, Fee, what were you excited about?
For me, it was just really a reflection on actually some of the stuff that we've already talked about. So leadership and governance, and I won't go into it in too much detail, but I want to see it questioned and improved, particularly governance. I sit on a couple of boards, and one was so proactive, and getting another one moving was very difficult. So I need to see that question coming out of this. I think that's exciting. It's an opportunity. Reflecting on what Ken said and a couple of other people, listening to donors. So we're having respect for and listening to donors more. So a shift from the us and them and moving towards the us together. And I think that's the ones that really flourished here, was viewed their donors as part of moving forward, not kind of a combatant or someone that had to be dragged along or ignored. And the other one for me is hope, and Sean mentioned it, mergers and acquisitions. New Zealand has over 27,000 registered charities here. We only have 5 million people in this country. It is quite outrageous. We have lots of federated organisations wasting resources. One organisation might have 9 boards, 9 bank accounts, 9 finance managers, 9 fundraisers. It's absolutely ridiculous. And watching small organisations seeking the same mission as large organisations go under, and large organisations sitting there with money in the bank that could have helped ensure those services continued or actually made their own organisation more robust and flourish. So they're my kind of 3 key ones.
Brilliant. Sean, I guess, well, maybe we kind of heard from you. Sorry, I forgot about that. Yep. Let's go back to Ken. Ken, what are you excited about?
Okay, well, I saw this question really as being about culture change post-COVID. And I think that a crisis is a great opportunity. And I think it's certainly to be hoped we'll be coming out of this crisis. And I hope it will lead to really substantial culture change across a whole lot of spheres in society. The first thing I would love to see is transparency and honesty will be moving up people's agenda, and particularly that politicians will come to realize that lying to the public is not a good strategy. Now, you mentioned your wonderful Prime Minister that you have in New Zealand. We have a Prime Minister in Britain who habitually lies to the public and has done so through every job he's ever had, as far as we are aware. And I think we're seeing a lot of that now, and we've, you know, the crisis in leadership that Stephen mentioned is, I think, very acute in the charity sector, but it's true in society all over. And I hope people will be emerging from this and saying, you know, we've had enough. We're not going to put up with that anymore. So I think community spirit might well visibly strengthen. I hope people will be nicer to each other. And there might be quite a few ways that we're going to change the way that we work. I'm not going to go into that just now, but I think that's fairly obvious. It'd be lovely if pollution would decline, if the skies and the roads would become clearer. I think the big thing is likely to be that public service workers will be reevaluated, and their importance will be reassessed, and hopefully that'll lead to better pay for nurses and care workers, and hopefully less good pay for bankers and hedge fund managers and things like that. But the care sector, I think, is I mean the care for the elderly is getting the attention that it has long deserved now, and I hope it will in future get the investment that it deserves, and maybe that would be a good thing that will come out of coronavirus. But for us, to me, I think we need to see a reassessment of fundraising fundamentals. And I think with the successes that Sean's been talking about, Simon's been talking about, Fiona's been talking about, all of you have mentioned that we're seeing fantastic successes by proactive, imaginative, creative fundraisers. And if we could set ourselves the task of showing that with these fundraising successes at a time of catastrophe, this gives us the best opportunity that we've ever had to move the culture so that we shift towards a culture that's not guided by fundraising targets and ever more persistent asking, but is actually focused on donor love and the consistent delivery of a good supported experience, which builds trust and confidence, and which enables people to go on to support the organizations that they love to support, and that we encourage them to do it. And we actually show them that giving is good for them, so that they will increasingly support our causes. Giving is good for you. It's good for your brain. It helps you in all sorts of ways. It's good for your well-being. It's good for your marriage. It's, you know, all of these things.
Yeah, you live longer. Yeah. You
live longer. And, you know, why can't we sell this a bit better than we do? I think now is the time for that reassessment of fundraising fundamentals and making sure that our leadership gets this and those fundamentals are inculcated through the DNA of our organizations, so that everybody, as soon as they start in this business, gets exposed to this.
Brilliant. I'm about to jump to Sean, but I just want to jump in on there. In terms of being accountable and things, one of the things I was interested to watch was the Captain Tom story, the amount of money it's raised. When the Christchurch shootings happened here, we raised so much money. Victim support raised a phenomenal amount of money, very much like the Captain Tom story. But it also resulted in a lot of questions being asked on exactly what was happening with that money and where it was going. And there was a lot of, a lot of questions. Who is how was that impacted? The people wanted to know exactly where their money was going. Is that question being raised yet in the UK about exactly how that 20 million is being spent?
Not at all. People don't care. But can I ask Michelle, do any of you know or would care to guess how many individual people contributed to the 32.8 million that Captain, now Colonel Tom,
Yeah.
has been. I wanted him to be Major Tom.
So how many donors was it?
Anybody like to guess?
Oh,
1.2 million.
It's over 1.5 million people. Now, this is a list I would like to get my hands on, because these are people who really want to do something to make a difference. And fantastic. I mean, what more do we need to show that, you know, giving, it's not just that people give to need. People need to give. This is absolutely fundamental to our comprehension of fundraising. And this is the bit that so many organizations and leaders miss.
Yeah, but it is a shame that they don't, you know, when you say they don't care where the money's being spent.
But they will ask. And you know, unfortunately, the money's been donated to the National Health Service and will be going to the government. And when our government particularly squanders money and is not likely to prove to be a good steward, and the National Health Service is a great big black hole that sucks up money. So I'm not sure that donors will be able to say, well, you know, my £25 bought a goat or a cow or a half a dozen chickens. You know, I don't think people are going to get that level of accountability. But maybe again, you know, it will raise the issue, and we as a fundraising sector should be saying, yeah, we've got to be accountable for that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Okay, Sean, I believe you'd like to...
I just had a story, Ken, about me and Michelle. Michelle and I have been chatting a lot back and forth and stuff. And one of the things I actually came across a charity where I asked them, you know, how are you doing? They wouldn't tell me in terms of their finances. They wouldn't tell me their reserves. The CEO told me that she doesn't meet... This was a caring charity, as in they care for people at their last moments. As opposed to uncaring charities, yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. Well, but she said she doesn't meet those people because that's not her job as CEO. And it was stunning, and it was exactly the kind of organization that I would actually like to support right now. And I was just stunned that their finances aren't shared on the internet for some loophole that allows them to not have to publish their, like churches here in Australia don't really, if you call yourself a church and you're a fundraiser, you don't actually have to do anything, you have no regulations. And it was a bit of a shock really. And again, the fundraiser from there was afterwards in tears. But I do like your vision, Comrade Ken Burnett, of this future where nurses are paid more and respected more. Dream on, yeah. Like it used to be in the 40s and 50s and 60s. Well, I won't be around long enough to see it, so I can dream.
Right, let's scoot back over to Ireland. Simon, what are you excited about? What shifts do you see? What's the future of fundraising?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very excited as always to see what happens with fundraising. You know, when the dust settles on this, I think as everyone has kind of talked about, we're going to see where the movers end up and where the people who haven't done anything end up. And I think, you know, that could be good for the sector in terms of elevating people who are really good at what they do and holding, you know, cutting out people who aren't doing anything. So as always, I'm interested to see how this is going to affect fundraising. But I suppose bigger picture, I mean, I think it's like there's a naive hope in me, and I know Sean is. If Sean's picking up on what Ken's saying about nurses getting paid more, he's definitely going to pick up on this. There's like a naive part of me which hopes and thinks maybe we're not going to have to do this much longer in terms of this whole system of
Comrade Scriver.
of just asking people for money for basic human rights, and you know, and you know, all these rich celebrities who have suddenly discovered empathy because it's arrived on their doorstep. I'm hoping it's the beginning of a change of that. I'm hoping it's the beginning of a change of like people who can't afford insulin, hoping that Jeff Bezos feels generous today, because if people decide to give today, we might survive. So I think there's an interesting culture shift which is happening, and you can see it. People discovering empathy, and I think vulnerability is a big thing. I've been talking a lot about this with Jen Love, as I know most of you know, and I really feel like this is going to be the next fundraising buzzword after storytelling and whatever donor-centric and stuff. Eventually we're going to start talking about vulnerability. I think the world has become a bit more vulnerable, and the world has become a bit more empathetic, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I swear, I live by that, and I swear by that if you reach out for help, people will help you, and humans are inherently good. As much as I hate them, like, we're generally good and we look after each other, but it's a broken system. I love our charity sector. I'm proud to be part of it, and I love the people I work with. But this safety net, it can't continue like this, and we're just at the whim of government spending, and we're at the whim of wealthy people who don't deserve that level of wealth, and no one deserves that level of wealth. And so I hope, naively, it's not going to change overnight, and I don't think I'm going to see it. But I do feel like my son is going to see a better world than I see, and I think his kids are going to see a better world than he sees, and eventually we're going to find some level of fairness where human rights are actually acknowledged, I suppose. So that's my pie in the sky wish to come out of this. But I see inklings of it. I see touches of it in terms of people just helping and people giving stuff away for free. And I'm not expecting us to go full communism, but there's something shifting. And I just hope it sticks after the dust settles.
Brilliant. What a wonderful, hopeful message that we can all be part of that generational change for the next generations. Let's go back to Rachel. Rachel, what are you most excited about? What shifts do you see taking place?
Yeah, it's interesting because, you mentioned the future of fundraising, and that was going to be my keynote for the FINZ conference. And it was going to be about innovation and about like virtual tools to allow people to connect. And we're seeing a lot of that. I think the positive side of this is all of the innovation that we're seeing. And another positive is the deeper donor relationships for fundraisers who are in fundraising for the right reasons, unlike the CEO that Sean mentioned, but who care about building deep and personally fulfilling relationships, because those will outlast this crisis. Those donors will never forget those fundraisers, and will always cherish those and how they stepped up. And I think there is, I agree with, I have the same hope for more vulnerability and people being willing to be vulnerable. Building relationships is not optional in fundraising. It's what fundraising is. And I'd like to see, I think that fundraisers who embrace this have seen success and have, and will continue to have deep personal relationships with their donors that support their charities. And those that don't, I think this is an opportunity for them to have a wake-up call around what it is that they want to do and how they want to show up and be seen and be heard. But I think those are the most positive outcomes of this, the new innovation of new tools to connect with donors and deeper donor relationships.
Brilliant, thank you. And let's go to Sam.
Hello, I am hoping, my big hope is that no one defines fundraising by special events anymore. So many CEOs and board members say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to hold another gala, another run, another golf tournament. Please let that not be the way that they think in the future. So a big part of it for me is the vulnerability of the special events have had on the sector. Certainly, we've seen heartbreaking people that have put out $40,000, $50,000 for an event that just vanished overnight, and now they're on the hook for that money and not seeing the revenue. So those that could pivot quickly, as we know, and really turn that into a virtual event of some kind will be the winners out of this. But let's, you know, so many people define fundraising by the bake sale. Let's hope that that ends. The other piece too, because I always have my analytical hat on, and I cannot wait to run analytical reports for people that did things right. And show them that, yes, show them that big spike that they've had. And this is the beauty of the analytical work that I have the true honor of doing, is that we get to see where people have succeeded and where they can grow. I never think about it as a negative. If they've had a dip year, I always look at stewardship. I always look at those things that they can do moving forward. And we're going to run those reports where they're going to see that they didn't do well. But I think the analytical piece, really, when it gets married to that relationship piece, is the sweet spot for me in fundraising. And my whole thing, and I can't even believe, I'm going to tell you, I have been so busy running reports since I thought it was going to die. Like on March 13th, I thought, no one's going to run a report, and that has not been the case. People are continuing to do that, and they're doing that in their own shops. And we had a webinar here where they would normally get about 250 people. We had over 1,200 people on it talking about analytics, and you wouldn't have got that in a normal day. So that's the silver lining out of all this for me. And I will never, ever wear this Carol Baskin jacket again, just so we know. This is another big lesson coming out of COVID-19 for me. But yes, I think there's some really good stuff, and I'm really grateful to be here with all of you.
Brilliant. Okay, and we're just going to jump back to, I have just been given a notice from Rachel that she might disappear. She does have another meeting to go to. So if you do disappear during Clive giving us a bit of an update, Rachel, it's been wonderful to have you. Thank you for your commitment to this whole project for FINZ, and thank you. Really, it's been brilliant. So let's move on to Clive. Clive, what's your thoughts?
So interestingly, just picking up on Simon's comment, one thing I did write down was, having noted what appears to be some quite varying aspects of altruism that are more broad across society. It'd be really interesting to see what aspects of that altruism stick and what just fade away. I'm interested in watching that. But more broadly, I think that one of the things I'm interested in is looking at the variances between donor demographics, largely age-based, older group versus younger group. So I'm interested in the older group of loyal donors, about how the projected change in gifts and wills giving occurs. So now with this shock, where a lot of people have stared death in the eye all around them, so to speak, how will that change in what changes they make to their wills and giving to charity? So I'm really interested in what that demographic, who I expect will largely behave the same going forward as they have in the last decade, and they're quite loyal, and as long as they're looked after, they'll continue to give and so on. But what will they do in gifts and their wills? And in the younger set, again, rash generalizations, where I think there's going to be an increase in responsive giving behaviour. So not saying that there won't be lifetime value of younger donors, but I expect that they'll be more responsive to situations that emerge, as opposed to really stuck in a lane with a particular type of cause or a particular area of concern, but instead behave in a more responsive fashion. And what I suspect will happen with that group is that impact measurement, management and reporting, or let's just say impact management more broadly, will be important. And I don't mean, so there's impact investment, which I know is going to grow exponentially over the course of the next 10 years at least, and that's connected in some way, and it's got this impact management component. But I think there's a way for that to be simplified but no less robust in a philanthropy context. So I'm interested in seeing how that might, when that's done well, how that might influence the responsive type of giving that I suspect will increase as the intensity of certain needs present themselves to the younger set of donors. So that's what I'm interested in.
Great, thanks, Clive.
No, Sean, before you go, can I just say, well, I hope I'm speaking on behalf of all of us. I'd like to say, before others go, a real big thank you to Michelle for organising this and doing it so well and with such grace. Michelle, thank you very much on behalf of all of us.
Thanks, Michelle.
We haven't finished yet.
No, we haven't. Thank you, guys. I'll wind it up in a second. But Sean, thank you so much.
It's been great fun, and it's been a privilege, and we've all enjoyed it. And you give us a platform, which is wonderful. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sean.
Thanks, you,
Bye.
Sean.
And Abby. Bye.
Bye, Sean.
Abby, before I finish up with Stephen, do you have anything to add in terms of what you're excited about and what the future might look like?
Of course I do. And look, it will surprise all of you to know that I'm really excited about partnerships. What do you know? Funnily, before coronavirus hit, there was absolutely a groundswell that was building around consumers and employees all around the world starting to demand more of their employers, their favorite brands, and they wanting them to stop operating from this place of profit at all costs and start developing more of a social purpose, to look around at our environment, our people, our planet, and stop being so myopic and self-interested and really kind of step into that space. So for me, clearly, we've already been speaking about it, but innovation loves a crisis, particularly, when we're in our comfort zone and everything's ticking along well, we're not really driven to create new things and think outside the box. So this is certainly a time where people are starting to do that. For me, when I talk about partnerships, it's I want charities to stop being the poor cousin at the table. I want government, I want corporates, I want people, groundswell, I want movements, and I want charities all to come together to look at how can we leverage our strengths to actually do these big things, and I think Dan Pallotta said in one of his TED Talks, why is it that the smallest, most under-resourced and budget-restricted organisations in the world are simultaneously the ones tasked with solving our globe's biggest issues? And I really personally want that to change moving forward. And, one of the things that I'm really noticing is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are something that that global brands around the world are really using as a lighthouse to navigate their way towards, well, what does a social purpose look like, and what do we kind of stand for, and what are our employees interested in, and what do our consumers want, and what kind of causes are they interested in? So, these 17 global goals for a better world that have been signed up to by 193 of the 196 countries around the world. And they're really not on the radar of a lot of charities. We don't, often we aren't mapping, what does our mission, what global goals does our mission map to, and what brands out there might be kind of interested. So, yeah, I think that they're really some of the big things is partnerships, but equity in partnerships, not brands just throwing money at charities because, you're a good cause and we've got a bit of emergency funding. We are thought leaders and innovators in our own right. And when we find that alignment between the right brand, it can absolutely be transformational. So that's where I would like to see it move.
Thank you, Abby. Yeah, very brilliant. And let's wrap up with Stephen over in the UK. Stephen, what are you most excited about in fundraising, and what shifts do you see taking place?
I'm most excited about when the British pubs open, to be
yeah,
as you can well know. A couple of things. I think one kind of negative thing. I think I have a fear that for fundraising, not necessarily fundraisers within fundraising. And the fear I have is that I kind of, I want to be careful what I say about it, but I have a sense sometimes that fundraisers have becoming quite judgmental. And if we aren't careful, there are two groups. I mean, the whole of this crisis has taught us about high levels of reconnection. We've reconnected with our families, our communities. My village here is more networked by volunteer networks now than and it was pretty good before, but every single street has a street coordinator. That is an enduring thing that will mean that the bonds are born out of a crisis that will change things. And I think, as everyone has said, that is one of the spirits that's going to come from this. It's going to make a significant difference. So, and it's going to manifest in every single way. I mean, entirely right, governments, corporations, whoever, and everything else. But if fundraisers are going to do the job of asking and connecting, inspiring people to, we're in the middle of that. And if we start to take a position that takes a judgmental view of people who have money because they have money and we don't like that, we may end up in a bit of a difficult place, because that's not quite our job. The other group that we've got to be careful of is we've got to be careful of the public, because I'm not yet convinced the public even understand what we do. The whole 32 million raised by Captain Tom, was all to do. We weren't even, there was a platform built. Let me just remind everybody, a for-profit platform built with commercial investment that made it possible. Just a small word for that. Well done to Just Giving and for that site. And they made that possible, in which case that those people were able to give that money, and we were in the middle. And I was schooled in the NSPCC, as Ken well knows, with Giles, and we are in the middle. We are not as important as we sometimes think that we are. And we've got to be very careful with that. If the public don't understand why we're asked and what our job is, they're going to kick back against it. So we've got to reconnect. It's just not just the concepts of reconnecting everywhere, but we've got to reconnect and not be judgmental about people we may have opinions about, but that's not our job. And the public who need to understand and connect with it. That's the first thing. Last thing, I think, more than anything else, is I think organizations have two kinds of purposes we forget. First one is to serve the purpose by which it was set up to deliver the work. That's its purpose, deliver the work. And the second purpose is to raise the money to pay for it. That's it. And pretty well anything else that's superfluous to that and doesn't get any, which means fundraising has to find its place right there again, and be confident that we can actually, that is our job. Our job is to deliver the work. We don't pay for the work, the donor pays for the work. And that's what we've got to absolutely focus on. And the most significant thing that I'm most excited about is legacies, because it was exciting before this horror story. And Clive, you're absolutely right. What has happened now is the first post-Second World War global traumatic experience of where were you when we could all connect with, and we will all have, and even tonight, even in this moment, or the morning for you, where one of our own here has lost his father to this, that there is a touch point for us, even the fear of it, that will change the way we'll think about life. And I think that absolutely, not just the demographics, but the way we can interact with it. And charities absolutely have to be on the front foot with legacies. If we are on the back foot of it, we do ourselves a great disservice. And I think we do the donor a disservice as well. So I'm pretty optimistic if we can get through and crack on in that particular way. So yeah, wow. Good stuff.
I mean, we're going to say what a session. It has gone on to coming up for an hour now, but I know this is going to be an hour. Our fundraisers, our members, and it can go around the world. It's on our website, free for anyone. It's going to be an hour that they just cannot buy anywhere else. And my hope for this, because I think one of the things that came out a bit earlier in the session was, there's got to be a culture shift at board and governance level, and that has always been something I've acknowledged, even in terms of getting them to fund their fundraisers, to come to learn more about fundraising. I think there's in the idea that we need to exist, FINZ needs to exist to provide this level of education for fundraisers, and that's often a struggle. So I want boards and I want this video to be shared, and how do we get the message to boards and leaders and governance? And that's always a question that I'm asking, and I don't know how to answer that. So I hope that this video is shared, and I hope that it's a starting point. There's been you know, we've got a global team here who are saying the same things, and I think that's an incredibly strong message. But thank you so much. I know how incredibly valuable your time is, and the support you've given to FINZ has just been phenomenal. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for getting behind this project, and it's just been brilliant. You guys are rock stars, and I love this. So